This is the beginning of our outdoor tour of interesting points in the Chautauqua Lake watershed. And one of the most interesting elements about the Chautauqua Lake watershed is that the upper reaches of it are part of the Continental Divide. And we've looked at all of the sites that crossroads that we could use as a continental divide, and we've decided that this site, 3/4 of a mile east of Route 394, north of Mayville, on the Beaujean Road, is the place to explain the Continental Divide. To the north, we look at the Beaujean Pond, which was on the 1954 U.S. geological maps, and to the south of the road, we look at the pond which Neil Johnson built after the 1954 USGS maps were made. The USGS map indicated that there was a culvert under the road. I can find no culvert under the road, so that I would suggest to you that if you were to go throw a bottle of water in Neil Johnson's pond, you've started water on its way to the Gulf of Mexico. And if we were to throw a bottle of water into the pond to the north, which I call the Beaujean Pond, your bottle of water is on its way to the Atlantic Ocean. The Beaujean Road, from this point up to the hilltop in each direction, does the best job of describing a continental divide that we can find in the northern reaches of the Chautauqua Lake watershed. It's an unusual place. It's not as dramatic as those that you find in the Rocky Mountains, but you are able to look into two different watersheds if you stand here at this point on the Beaujean Road in the town of Chautauqua. Both of these ponds, by the way, are loaded, when they are open, are loaded with migratory birds in the spring and the fall of the year. And in the middle of August, if you get out here early enough in the morning and look particularly up in the Beaujean Pond where there are a lot of logs, you can count turtles beyond number. Nothing but the still quiet of winter is with us at this point, after all those vehicles went by. We are now looking across Chautauqua Lake to Point Chautauqua from the village park, the village of Mayville, immediately east of the railroad station. If we were to get into a time machine and drop back to the year 1860, we would find that we were standing out in Chautauqua Lake. This area between here and the street has been totally filled in. We're going to pan around to the Hartfield Bay area of the lake, and eventually, as we do that panning, realize that we had docks extending out into the lake for steamboat operation in the 1890s. We went out as much as 350 feet, and a dock might be 50 feet wide. The biggest enemy of the docking facilities was the spring freshet, and we learned this in recent history when we again tried to build a permanent dock, and in 2 years the spring ice came off and took the dock out. It was also one of the problems that the railroads had when they first built through here, that the ice, when the ice would come out, would pile up on the railroad track. The willow trees that you see were planted of recent history, 1925. As we scan to the Erie Street and we come up onto a gas station and Jambrone Seafood House, if you can imagine, 1886 and 1887 the railroads came through, and the first hotel built on the lake as part of the railroad lake attraction was the Chautauqua House. It was built with 66 rooms, and eventually in its multi-story wooden construction had 132 rooms in it. As we continue to pan around to the left, we come upon the recently built railroad station that was constructed in 1925 to replace the original wooden construction which had burned several years earlier. Because of the action of the ice out drama on the lake, which by the way is the biggest action, natural action against that creates erosion around the shores, we realize that all of this area has been raised a number of feet above the original construction of the railroad in 1886 and 87 because of that eroding force of the ice. As we pan further around, we come to the Chautauqua Belle, which is of recent vintage on the lake, the only large vessel now plying the lake. And we come to the Mayville Village Park, which was the site of a very large ice house industry during the 1880s and 1890s. When the railroads came, there was a tremendous ice industry here. And this is recorded in a pamphlet that is available at the Mayville Library, done by Willis Rothra on the ice industry. I was talking about the railroad coming through Mayville. It's the years 1867 to 1868 that the railroad comes through Mayville. We don't see any other dynamic railroad activity until 1902, about a decade after Edison comes up with his central power generation theory, and all of a sudden we get the explosion of trolley lines all over the United States. Between 1902 and 1905, an electric trolley line is built up the west side of the lake and all the way to the village of Westfield. And the remnant that we have of it is the entrance gate and structure to Chautauqua Institution. Basically, the vast majority of the structure related to the trolley business coming up from Jamestown and coming down from Mayville and bringing passengers from the electric lines. The interesting thing that happens, of course, is that the trolley lines begin to compete with the steamboats, and we see a dynamic drop in the number of vessels on the lake as the trolley line serves the west side of the lake. By 1925, the line is discontinued. But its remnant, the entrance to Chautauqua County, remains to this date. We are looking down lake from in front of the Athenaeum at Chautauqua Institution. A stop on Chautauqua Lake or a discussion of Chautauqua Lake would not be complete without the institution as part of the story. But we're going to pan so that you can see what the view looks like. We're passing along Long Point State Park at this point and coming up lake. And the first large building that you can see is the skating rink at Midway Park. We then go by the private homes of the Welches and scan up lake. Along the way we have the quasi-public holdings, the Chedwell development, Crosswinds, DeWittville Bay with the Y Camp, and finally into Tinkertown Bay. And we come then immediately to the Miller Bell Tower at Chautauqua Institution. The building that you see in front of the bell tower, of course, is the point at which all of the steamers landed for a number of decades during the 1870s to 1930 was the last time we really saw any activity in terms of carrying passengers. As we scan by the landscape, we begin to get a little bit of the flavor of Chautauqua Institution. We could spend days talking about the various buildings, but the most important and most impressive building in my book is the Athenaeum, constructed in 1881. It's one of the two hotels left from the great days of the motel and steamboat history of Chautauqua Lake. In the summertime, you can almost see the ladies with their parasols and their broad-brimmed hats and their flowing gowns walking on the balcony of the Athenaeum. This building, by the way, was modernized by the Chautauqua County Industrial Development Agency in the 1980s. It was modernized. A most impressive wooden structure. Some of the wooden structures that were built around the shores of the lake were larger than this, but this is one of two that remain from that wonderful and exciting era of the 1880s, 90s, and turn of the century. We're looking up into Bemis Bay from just south of the Stowe Ferry, and we're going to pan in an easterly direction so that you can see the ferry as it now exists. And as you do that, you can look into the background and see the village of Bemis Point. Realize that the ferry was the first commercial vessel running on a daily basis on Chautauqua Lake. It started in 1811 as a private endeavor, eventually to be taken over by the Chautauqua County Board of Supervisors and run as part of the county highway system. And then with the completion of the Southern Tier Expressway, it was taken off of the county highway system and is now being run by the Chautauqua Lake Historic Vessels Group. As we look to the south, of course, we can see the Chautauqua Lake Bridge. We've talked about that previous sessions. Realize that the majority of the pilings do not go down to bedrock. They are friction pilings, and it is the friction on the side of the pilings that holds the bridge as it is. The bridge was designed in order with enough height so that the E-scows and the Chautauqua Belle could pass underneath it. That became the criteria for the height of the bridge. One of the other things that is happening this time of year, the lake is still open, and we have a substantial number of mallard ducks that live about the shores of the lake. Many of the people along the shoreline feed them and enjoy them immensely. The day after ice out, these birds disperse to the rate of about one pair, which will attempt to nest about every 100 meters around the shore of the lake.
Okay, we're going.
We're at the north entrance to the Viewcoat Canal system. This is a development that blossomed as the railroad, the electric line, came up the east side, or the west side of Chautauqua Lake between 1902 and 1911. Today's rules and regulations would not allow this development to exist at all, because if you look at the 1902 map of the area, this is all designated as a wetland. From this point, we can look across Chautauqua Lake, out the mouth of the canal, to the John Cheney farm on the opposite side of the lake, and the location where we have the Southern Tier Expressway rest stop and view opportunity from the western side of the lake. And if we move down on the other side of the canal a little bit, we can look up lake and see the Chautauqua Lake Bridge. But you'll notice that the Chautauqua Lake Bridge is not a horizon element. It's hidden down in the horizon because of its height. As we pan around, we can look into the canal system. Realize that this land speculation created in the early part of this century was predicated on lots 135 feet deep by 35 feet wide, which meant that in order for it to be a safe place, you needed public water and sewer. But there was no sewers in this particular area until the South Chautauqua Lake Sewer District was created. Water system came out much earlier. It was necessary, and you can see that these homes even today are not that much above the lake level. The lake level this morning was 1307.8 feet above mean sea level, and so you can see that this particular area of the shoreline of Chautauqua Lake in the storm and spring freshet of March of 1976, all of these properties had water around their foundation. The fact of the matter is that there were 845 properties with water around the foundation of the houses. And that was a 100-year storm. And we have other frequencies of storms, so that there is a future for these people to have wet floors if we get an inordinately difficult summer storm. The Viewcoat Canal area, an area which would not have been allowed to be developed if a permit was asked for in 1995. We're at the end of Dunham Avenue in the village of Celeron, at what is now the Celeron Park. and we're looking down the outlet of the lake. And as Devin pans, we'll go by Bonita, which was a development that was started with the railroad as it went up the east side of the lake in the 1880s, and look across the lake at the development. In all instances, these properties were developed on dimensioned lots that under urban design criteria would say that they should have public water and sewer, and they did not have either public water and sewer, and some of them still don't have public water. They received sewers in the late 70s or early 1980s. As Devin scans up lake and begins to look at the south shore, we come on to the remnants of the Celeron Amusement Park. I would strongly suggest that you look at the trolley booklet by Fenton and the hotel booklet, and you'll see what these places looked like about the turn of the century. We're looking across the lake at the extension of the end of Dunham Avenue in the village of Celeron, and realize that in the early 1900s there was a railroad trestle with the trolley lines that went almost halfway across the lake at this point, and where the steamships would come up, and then the people would get on the steamships to take their trips up lake. They said that it was a time element, that the people didn't want to ride up the outlet of the lake. I believe that it may also have been a loading issue as far as the steamboats were concerned, but we don't find much of that in the literature. We're standing on the Jones and Gifford Bridge over the outlet of Chautauqua Lake, and on the east side of the outlet we find what used to be the railroad stations and trolley stations, and as we scan in a northerly direction and across the outlet of the Chautauqua Lake, which is now the Chautauqua River, we find the remnants of the turning basins for the steamboats. And if you want to see what this looks like when it is in full activity, look at the steamboat document published by the Fenton Historical Society. This used to be an extremely active place with as many as 8 large steamboats docked in this area. Now, of course, it is a memorial park maintained by the city of Jamestown. We're standing just upstream of the Washington Street Bridge and looking down and going to scan for you the upstream side of Warner Dam. Realize that this is the 3rd dam that has been erected in this area. The first dam was erected the 4 dams have been erected in this area. Prendergast built one in 1811 and then rebuilt one in 1812 and 1813. In 1919, a new Warner Dam was dedicated just upstream of the existing dam, and it stayed until the 1980s, and the state of New York reconstructed this dam for the people of Chautauqua County a little bit out from beyond the ice and snow fall off of the Washington Street Bridge. The dam is on this side does not look very awesome. We will move to the downstream side so you can see that there is almost a 7-foot fall in water through the dam at this time of year. Lake elevation is 1307.8 this morning, according to the Post-Journal. We are on the downstream side of Warner Dam now. In the background you can see the Washington Street Bridge. From this side you can see the 3 Tainter gates. The capacity of the dam has the capacity to pass 6,000 cubic feet per second. However, at 1,720 cubic feet per second, the development in the village of Faulkner begins to suffer flood damage. Today the lake elevation is 13.7.8. At that elevation, because of the constriction above the 3rd Street Bridge, we are passing less than 1,000 cubic feet per second down through the channel. In fact, it may be down to as much as 800 feet. This even though only one of the dam gates is open. Later on in the year, for public relation purposes, they may open more than one gate, but it is not necessary that more than one gate be open to maintain the flow down the Chautauqua River itself. Realize that in the summertime, these gates are closed to the point that only somewhere between 20 and 60 cubic feet per second pass, and that is necessary in order to hold the summer lake elevation of Chautauqua Lake. The most important function that Warner Dam has is the maintaining of the summer lake elevation. If we were to remove Warner Dam from the Chautauqua River, the summer elevation of the lake would drop down to somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,303 feet, some 5 feet lower than the minimum elevation we would like to see for our summer experience. We're at Dow Street now. The reason for coming to Dow Street is to show you the elevation of the river and the flume that is used to measure the flow of the Chautauqua River. We're now almost 50 feet down in elevation from the top of Warner Dam. And as you can see, as we would pan out upstream here, we do have a little flooding of the neighboring lands of the Chautauqua River. We're going to cross Dow Street and look downstream, and you'll get an idea of how constricted we have made the river. In earlier presentations I noted that the river is now somewhere between a quarter and a third of what its original cross-section was when the Holland Land Company first did its survey through this area. So we'll step across the road now and look at the downstream flume and measuring device that gives us the measurements of the outflow of Chautauqua Lake and the Chautauqua River. Here we are at the measuring flume. Realize that we've come by a place called Piusville, and we've passed Slippery Rock, which are places that are mentioned in Hazeltine's history of the town of Ellicott and mentioned many times by the historians. Notice how wide the river is at this point. Again, as I noted earlier, we have come down in river elevation almost 50 feet. By the time we get to the Work Street Bridge in Faulkner, the river bottom has dropped 50 feet. And so we have this flow. We're probably at a flow of somewhere between 700 and 1,000 cubic feet per second. The best we can take in terms of flow without damaging abutting property in the village of Faulkner is 1,720 cubic feet. Both of these stations can be interrogated by telephone at any time so that we can know what the flow down the Chautauqua is and what the Chautauqua Lake elevation is. This material is recorded on a 15-minute interval, and we can do all kinds of statistical analysis of what is happening down the river and at the lake. We're standing at the boat launch site owned and operated by the state of New York, at Bemis Point. The site at one time was a fish hatchery, and prior to that it had a record as being an Indian burial ground. And no matter where you look throughout Oriental Park and the village of Bemis Point, we're dealing with an area that is rich in Indian artifacts if one is going to spend any time digging to any depth. In the park itself, at the casino, there are 32 inches of stratified Indian remains. We're going to scan around through part of Oriental Park and Bemis Point and out and look at the Chautauqua Lake Veterans Memorial Bridge, and underneath it we can see these other south shores of Chautauqua Lake. We've been very fortunate today with the weather on the second day of December. Here, of course, the bridge becomes an element in the skyline, but I would suggest to you that while it spoiled some people's appreciation of the lake as they owned it prior to the bridge, the new people coming are still keeping the property values as they would have been because there is so much demand for lake frontage. When we get to the westerly shore, we can actually scan back, and when you get to the area where you can see the smoke rising, you can also see the Bemis Point Ferry. This happens to be one of the few places in the lake where we have controlled the surface of the lake, and there is a speed limit control from the bridge back and just beyond the ferry at Stowe to Bemis Point. As we scan further to the right, we come upon a very small concrete building. This building is the gauging station for measuring Chautauqua Lake elevation. It was funded by county and U.S. geological funds, and part of it was out of the program resulting from Tropical Storm Agnes in June of 1972. This gauge station has been online since 1974, and all measurements that you read in the Post-Journal are taken at this point. The gauge may be interrogated by telephone, and that number, of course, is not listed. The only people that use the telephone and the gauging station are the Board of Public Utilities, who by default have had to operate Warner Dam, and by the County Planning Department and the U.S. Geological Survey. Is the Hotel Lenhart in Bemis Point. This is the second Lenhart, built in 1891. One of the only two wooden hotels left as part of the great era of 1870 to 1910. As you scan across, we scan across this way and scan over towards the casino, realize that we are scanning an area that was very actively used by Native Americans for centuries. And the fact is that we've done some archaeological digs here and can go down 32 inches with Indian signs and relics, potsherds, fire-cracked rock, and flint instruments. We then scan out across the Stowe Ferry site and into Bemis Bay, and the onshore facility that we are going to scan by right now is where the Chautauqua Belle ties up for part of the summer. Off in the distance is the marina for Long Point State Park, and then we begin to come into the private development to the south of the park and into the village of Bemis Point.